This story begins as a baby was wrapped in a quilt and opened her eyes and didn't understand where she was and what was happening to her. Her mother looks at her and happily says that her Hanaropi has woken up. The child looks at her in amazement and does not understand who this lady is. The child seems shocked when his mother holds him and finds out that she is his mother, and analyzes that she thought she was reincarnated in another world, although her mother didn't have enough. Gave her a lot of love, felt warmth that she never received in her previous life. The little girl was sitting in her mother's arms, and they were both happy with beautiful flower crowns on their heads. For the first time, she had a real family, but that happiness didn't last long. Her mother was already in bed, and that little girl climbed up on a chair next to her mother's bed and asked her if she was okay. Her mother was thinking and told the girl to listen carefully and ordered her to go and visit her father. The little girl with blonde hair makes big eyes at her mother's command and asks her what she means by that and decides to tell her that she has no father. But her mother analyzes and tells her that her father is alive. The girl's father was Prince Hart von Reinhardt, with a very serious uniform on. The girl's mother tells her that there is a note with the address of her father's mansion in the second drawer of the nightstand, telling her sadly that she gave money to her Uncle Sandy to take her from there. If she goes with him to her father's mansion and tells him her name, he will recognize her immediately. The little girl started crying and her mother was caressing her face, telling her that her father had promised that if they had a baby they would name her Hanalopi. So her mother left her. Then she saw the note and realized. Hanalopi sat and read that note and thought that it was not her father, Hart von Reinhardt. In any case, she analyzes that she was possessed and not reincarnated. The Hanaropi that possessed her is not mentioned in the original novel. She was Hart's daughter. Hart arrives in a room and sees two people, a man and a woman. They bend down in front of him and he asks them how Asta is doing. They point to Asta, and he sees no improvement. She is still sitting with her eyes closed, showing no signs of life. Hanalopi held onto Hart's leg and analyzed that, as expected, Hart felt guilty about the incident. At one point, it was already tea time when Asta collapsed after eating a cake. This one looked in a very bad state and said she wasn't eating those cookies anymore. The person who was with her at the time she collapsed was Hart. He held her in his arms and looked at her very scared. He felt guilt that he couldn't protect her even though she was in front of him at that moment. He felt a fear of losing his side again. With pain in his heart, Hart listened to this request as a submissive derivative. Hanalopi peeks at Asta from behind Hart's leg and thinks sadly that when she read the novel, she thought this gradually laid the groundwork for revenge. Her heart aches when she sees Hart's expression. He asks of the man who looked after Asta that if Duke Eisen, who gave the cookies, still claims he is innocent, replying that he still claims his innocence and will find the culprit. He is even said to be doing a full investigation of the house. Hart looks nervous and says they should have gotten rid of him the moment he started arguing with that about everything. A boy stands with his back to them and tells them that Duke Eisen is gone, complaining that he's looking for an antidote. That boy was Patrick von Reinhardt. He was a well-dressed boy with beautiful green eyes. He asks Hart if he ended up coming empty-handed, being his older brother. Hart leans over and asks him who came empty-handed, telling him he found an antidote. Patrick, hearing this, looks shocked and asks what antidote he found and what kind of doctor made it. Hart was holding Hanalopi in his arms and says she came to visit the daughter of a brilliant doctor she had helped in the past. Said she learned pharmacy from her mother and knew how to make an antidote. Hanalopi smiles and waves hello to them. The others were shocked that a child could make an antidote. Patrick looks at the little girl and asks if she is a dragon having fun or a wizard guided by magic. Patrick pulls at the little girl's cheeks and she gets angry. Hart tells them that she is just a regular kid and this child's biological mother is a brilliant doctor. Hanalopi lifts her head and looks Hart in the eye, telling him that it's good that he says so, and she had to say that Hanalopi is just as brilliant. She gets upset and thinks that indeed he is her favorite character, but he lacks delicacy. Rather than that Patrick von Reinhardt, she never thought she would meet the male lead with the original novel there. Patrick stood with his hand to his chin and analyzed that this child has pink eyes and could be that genius Dr. Hart had mentioned, asking if she was Laura Koch. Patrick seemed agitated, telling her he had finally found the woman. Then, of course, saying that the biological father of that child is being interrupted by Hart and tells him to shut up. Hanelope has sad eyes and looks at Hart. It's because he doesn't want to acknowledge her as his daughter to the point where he looks at her very sternly. Hart sits with his hands on the cross and looks seriously at Hanelope. At one point, the woman who is taking care of Asta comes in agitated and tells Prince Hart to stay a while. And how can he trust a doctor made by a child, and asks him to wait a little longer? Then she and Hansen will create a cure. Hanelope was holding on to Hart's arm, and he tells that woman not to worry, and confirmed beforehand that there were no strange ingredients. The little girl was furious and analyzes that the person is Philin, the temple council member who also appeared in the original novel, and then she better hurry up. The little girl sits on Hart's shoulder and tells him with big eyes that timing is important with this drug. He looks at her and understands. Hart was holding a liquor in his hand and holding Asta's head. He says he's sorry and starts pouring that bottle of liquor in her mouth. The little girl stands and watches and analyzes that this time it won't go as planned, because this time she wants to stay with Hart. They all stood around Asta. After Hart poured the liquor into her mouth, Hart looked and looked desperate and asked Asta if she was okay, and Patrick asked if she could hear her. Asta opens her eyes and puts her hand to her chin and thinks about why she is there and what she is doing in that bed. Hart looks sad and asks Asta if she really doesn't remember anything. She replies that she remembers fainting while eating a cookie. They said the cookies had poison in them. She is saddened when she remembers the poison in the cookies and says that somehow she felt something was wrong when she swallowed that cookie, and she asks Patrick and Hart, but how could she wake up after taking the poison and if the two of them saved her? But they tell her that they couldn't wake her up. She sees the two men and the woman and asks if they are members of the gathering. Hart answers that they are not members. This little one starts to smile and asks Philin why he is doing this, and if he has something to say. Philin reminds her, well, this was the saint, and allow him to tell a little story. Hanelope stands by Hart's leg and smiles, and shouts to Asta that she woke her up, woke the saint up with the medicine Hanerote made. Asta looks surprised when that little child and asks Prince Hart who that child is, and if indeed that child woke her up. Hart was stroking Hanelope's head, and she seemed happy, and he tells Asta that she is the daughter of a gifted doctor. When he gave her the antidote that made that baby, she opened her eyes immediately. Asta asks Hart if she woke up after taking the antidote that made that baby. Hanelope admires Asta and analyzes that she looks embarrassed, wondering who wants to play such a game. The person who begged the biscuits given by Duke Eisen, Asta was herself, in the original. Asta goes to gain power for revenge after the saint came. Instilled much guilt in Hart and made him her loyal dog. At Asta's request, Hart could have been seriously hurt. She didn't care, even though a bad reputation had accumulated. Two girls sat and talked amongst themselves if this incident was also the work of Prince Hart. They said he is truly a monster. The more he listens to Asta's request, the more people around him left Hart and became lonely. This one holds Hart's hands and tells him that everyone does too much, and how he can call His Majesty a monster, and hugs him and tells him not to worry because she is on his side, and will be by His Majesty's side until the end. Hart eventually dies in Asta's place, having been seriously injured. Hanelope sat thinking that because she is now at Hart's house, she will reveal the self-made game she started. And she tells Asta that she is glad the saint woke up after taking the medicine Hanelope made. This one squeezes Hanelope's hands and thanks her for surviving, and tells her that if she really woke up with the medicine she made, he asks her what the poison was that knocked her out. She touches Hanelope's face, and Hanelope shouts that it was not poison. Asta is shocked, and Hanelope tells her that what Hanelope is doing is just an antidote to her fatigue. What she ate with the cookies was not poison. It was a medicine that made her look dead for a few weeks. Philin is the person who was ordered to receive the drug and falsely diagnose Asta as having been poisoned. As time passed, Asta woke up from her slumber, and their plan was to diagnose the patient with natural detoxification by her own power. When she sat and slept, and Hart poured her the medicine, the little analysis was what knew this, came forward that Asta had planned it, gave her the medicine, and made her wake up. This medicine has a mania-amplifying effect, Although using it as a treatment for genetic diseases is a failure, for Hanalopi, it was the best effect for waking up with a simple nutritional supplement. Patrick looks at Hanalopi and asks her if it wasn't poison, then why she fell like that. Hanalopi replies that she thinks the saint probably took a lot of sleeping pills and was overtired. So Hanalopi woke her up with a fatigue antidote. Patrick looks at Asta and asks her if everything that has been said so far is true. She replies that it can't be possible. This one looks shocked and tells Patrick that when she ate the cake, she felt her throat burning, as if she had swallowed poison. She turns her head to the little girl and says it's clear the kid is wrong, and wonders how a child could have woken her up in the first place. Hart sat with his hands on the cross and tells Asta that no one could wake her up. But she woke up as soon as he gave her the medicine that Hanalopi had made, hearing that she made some big eyes. He says the person who should be the most suspicious now is the first one who claimed an unknown toxic substance was found in the cookies, wondering if that person isn't Filena. Philin was very shocked to hear this and says it's a misunderstanding, and Asta approaches her and tells her in a raised tone that he knew she doesn't always like him, but he does something like this, and how he can do this to her. Philin doesn't understand what's going on and says Asta's words are different, and Hart approaches Hansen and tells him to go quickly and call the knights and get him out of there. And Philin, as the knights are leading him out the door, says it's not unfair and asks him to listen to him first. Patrick catches Asta, and Hanalopi looks at them and analyzes that, as expected, she is Asta and has cut her tail immediately. Hart looks at Hanalopi and asks her that something strange might be noticed. Hart looks towards Hanalopi, again thinking it could be that he noticed something strange. At that time, Hart says it's not a fatigue antidote, but a fatigue recovery agent. Hanalopi looks shocked when Hart asks her that she says she's naked, but she doesn't even know that. She's thinking that's what she was going to do at that moment. They were sitting at the table having tea with some sweets. Patrick thinks for a moment and says he really didn't think he would wake Asta. So asking her if she is Laura Koch's daughter, the little girl closes one eye and analyzes that he can't praise her. But he twists it there, and how can he be so indifferent to her? He eats a very delicious biscuit and thinks it wasn't enough to wake Asta, and what he had to do to get closer to Hart. Hanalopi points to Patrick and asks if she can have another cookie. He agrees and says he can give her the recovery medicine he showed her earlier. She didn't know what to say when she heard this, and asks if it is a recovery medicine. Patrick yawns from fatigue and tells Hanalopi that he is very tired these days and doesn't know the reason. She looks at him and analyzes that it is not difficult to give him the medicine. She takes out that medicine and looks at him. At that time, Patrick wanted to take it and suggests to Hanalopi to give him as much money as he wants. She didn't want to give that medicine because there is only one recovery medicine. Hanalopi hands Hart that medicine while he sits with the teacup in his hand. She thinks if she gives him the gift of the remaining bottle, his favorability will increase. As the two of them sit on the couch, Hart replies that he doesn't want that medicine. At that moment, in front of Hanalopi's eyes, it darkened, and she looked at him with a very pretty face and thought that, however, when it comes to Hanalopi, Emperor Hart is the best. She prayed that he would accept that medicine and wouldn't let him get hurt and die. Patrickle started laughing and said that this little girl seems to have fallen in love with Hart. Patrick looks at them with bright green eyes and asks if seriously what he likes about his brother and if he isn't more handsome, at which point Hart glares at Patrick, and Hanalopi shouts from behind that Prince Hart is more handsome. While they were sitting at the table, I hear some noises. As that gentleman comes through the door, there are voices that His Excellency, he must not come and do this without an appointment. It was so noisy as he came. As he opens the door, that gentleman Hart stands up and says he has found the culprit who tried to poison the saint. That gentleman was Duke Magnus Eisen, the representative of the temple sect and Asta's guardian being appointed by the temple. And this person who was suspected of being guilty of poisoning Asta, although he is her guardian, he neglected Asta, and she neglected him. Asta is the culprit of this poisoning. He planned this so that Duke Eisen would be suspected, but he did not suffer. Duke Eisen pushed a small child downstairs and said very angrily and in a raised tone that the child was to blame, because in his cursed room he had found a witch's poison that appeared to be a keepsake from his biological mother. He blamed his illegitimate son. The Duke and Duchess haven't had children for a long time. He has an illegitimate son who was neglected, He brought Brantley Eisen and made him his successor. Now, as fate would have it, the Duchess became pregnant after the birth of his legitimate son, Yakov. The child was very sad and not feeling well at all. For Brantley, even the recognition of the emperor as his successor was a thorn in his eye. So he took this opportunity to cover himself and negotiate with him. Hart looks very stern and asks Duke Eisen if that kid tried to poison Asta and if he's sure, at which point Eisen points to that poor kid and says that not long ago he had a grudge against the Sphinx for behaving rudely and being shaved. Clearly, Hanalope was not in a good mood looking at Brantley, and analyzes that those parts of his body that are cleverly hidden are full of scars. Duke Eisen gets agitated and starts shouting that he can't admit what he did, at which point Hanalope stands in front of him and defends Brantley and says that he is not a sinner and not to bother him. He points at Hanalope, telling her that the boy made the saint fall, but he is not a sinner, asking her what that means. She replies that as for the saint, Hanalope healed her. He looks sternly at her and decides to say what kind of nonsense is that kid talking about now. Hart is looking at Duke Eisen, and Hanalope is standing behind him. Hart, to reassure Eisen, tells him that that child is right. This one woke up, couldn't wake up because he took sleeping pills, and the Duke's boy did nothing wrong. Duke Eisen couldn't stop fidgeting, and in the back, Patrick scratches at the bed and asks him to explain. He starts telling him that night, that child, and explained everything to him after all. The little boy was sitting down on the floor and couldn't stand the sadness. At that moment, Hanalope approaches him and asks him if he is okay. She offers him a gift, that gift being a medicine that can heal him quickly when he applies it to a painful area. She tells him to hide it quickly so the bad guy can't steal it. Yo-Yo Brantley was holding that medicine in his hand, and a tear started to flow, and he asked the little girl why she helped him. She wondered why she did that. The little boy had slightly visible injuries, receiving an unfair accusation that he received, even though he didn't do it, a house being no one on his side. She thought it was because it seemed to overlap with her. She comes up to his ear being happy, and tells him he is a cute little boy. He seems excited at that moment and didn't know what to say to that compliment. To her, he was the cutest little boy. She decided that Brantley should wait for her for a moment, because that would save him, too. This one was in a white dress, being very angry, clenching her fists. The plan worked perfectly for her. She got the arrogant Duke to kneel in front of her. She managed to create a debt to Hart, but failed. What she needed to do was plan to make this plan a success, to exploit Duke Moltke's weakness. Duke Moltke is the representative of the Imperial faction, and a person who will become a great source of power for Anna in the future. However, he violates national legislation by developing iron ore mines and selling them without his wife's knowledge. If he is not careful, it is not just simple corruption. It is a situation that can be misunderstood as evidence of treason. This is an opportunity to insect Duke Moltke and deal with him. The girl sat with her hand under her chin, thinking that the problem is Parosan, where the mine is located, is full of dangerous monsters. But she planned to ask Hart to bring her proof as a debt to her following this poisoning. But that's how things get, and that because of a child. She would go down the hall and analyze what is with that child. She had never seen such a child her last life, for there was something that was not right. That child would be sent away by her. Hanalope stood with a basket in her hand in front of the stairs, and thought she didn't expect Hart to recognize her as his child. But so she never thought they would tell her to come out right away. A man and a woman look very sternly at that little girl. He shouts at her that she has disappeared without saying a word, and to go back calling her a rude troublemaker. He squeezes her hand and she feels it hurt, and analyzes that in addition, he called her Uncle Sandy without consulting as expected. He should have clung to Hart more actively yesterday, but that's how adults always are. Hanalope sat sadly and analyzed that she didn't want Hart to hurt her like that. Yet she was glad for one thing. Brantley's future had changed from her thinking. The man and that woman were carrying Hanalope, and she was very sad, and thought that she would surely come back and make Hart happy, because that's what her mother wanted. As she walked along, she was shouting that she would see the prince again. Hart was standing by the window looking up at Asta, and she asked him if he was still looking out the window. He replied that that kid was annoyingly attached to him all the time, and he was looking at her because it was weird that he said he was coming back. Asta smiled and told him she knew he was a cute kid, but he also felt sad. They are both looking out the window, and Hart thinks about it and decides to ask Asta if that child really said he wanted to come back to her. Asta replies that he came to her early this morning and asked her for a favor, that he wanted to go home to her family. Hart clenches his fist and asks Asta if by family she means the couple who are the guardians. She tells him that from what she's heard, they seem like nice people. It's not easy to raise someone else's child when you're not their biological parent. He looks seriously at Asta and tells her that he still should have consulted with him before sending her away. He should have at least said goodbye to her and sent her away. They start looking out the window and she tells him like when she was a kid, she wonders if it's scary to be away from her family for a night, and he asked her to send her to them immediately. And she asks Hart if he has any spite for that child. He replies that he didn't tell her that since he owes her, she must follow her duties. He remembers how he was holding the little girl by her shoulders, and her name is Hanelope. At first he thought she was his child, but his daughter must be 7 years old. He looked at her birth certificate and found she was only 5. Laura had left him, and should at least live a good life. And he gives her the name he promised the child to someone else. He wonders what kind of leopard the child's father is to let Laura raise the child alone. Maxim bows to the Emperor, and he commands him to attach someone to the child who is left. If anything happens, he must report to them immediately. Hanelope put her hand to her forehead and stood next to a kettle full of water and said tiredly that today's cleaning was complete. She couldn't believe she was finally going back to that house again. Before her mother died, she asked Uncle Sandy to take care of her. As soon as her mother died, she changed her mind and just took the money. As she walked down the hall, she was hungry, and they left a lot for her today. She closes her eyes and thinks about the desserts she ate at Hart's were delicious. And now she analyzes that she has to come to her senses and wonders if the first plan failed, but more needs to be done. If she wanted to cure the genetic disease, she doesn't have to give up here. She noticed a black book on a shelf. There have been pharmaceutical secretaries from generation to generation of the Koch clan. This is evidence of research into curing genetic diseases. The Koch family suffered from a hereditary disease, and their lifespan is 30 years at most. Her mother, who died young and was the last person left, gave birth to her. So when she dies, the Koch family will be a masterpiece. She sat in bed and read that book, and wondered if their ancestors had made a big mistake in the past, and why this genetic disease came about. In a moment, a very angry little boy opens the door. That little boy smiles at her and tells her to tell him how many times, and to call him by the name Burns. She looks at him a little angrily and thinks they are seeing each other again. And how the hell is he going to bother her today? He angrily asks her why she's looking at him like that, and he's older than she is. Hanelope replies that she's 7 years his senior, and asks him how many times he has to tell her it's because Mom registered the birth late. He turns his head in anger and tells Hanelope that if there are any more of the snacks he brought yesterday, she asks him if he ate it all and tells him he got it as a gift. Hanelope grabs his hand and he tells her that the house is his, and if he is hiding something to give it to her quickly, he finds the book on the book Hanelope was reading, and looks dubiously at her asking what the book is. She desperately replies to give him the book back because it is hers. He held that book in his hand with a very evil face, and asked Hanelope if she really wanted that book. He would give her more snacks. If she didn't fulfill her wish, he would otherwise burn that book. She, hearing this, turned black in the face, and thought it was the only souvenir of her mother left. Hanelope jumps to that boy to save her book, and he laughs and asks her if something as small as her could reach him, and quickly give him some snacks. He holds her forehead, and in a moment she gets angry and bites his hand. Burns was scared after being bitten, and Hanelope already had the book with her. He was in a lot of pain from that bite. At one point he opens his father's door and asks what's going on. The crying boy shows his father that his finger hurts. The father didn't understand, and angrily says that the girl took her because she had nowhere else to go and raised her, and asks her how she will repay him. He pulls her by the hand and tells her to follow him. Today being the last day, he will cause trouble. Hanelope had big eyes. She was reassured that a guest to take over would be waiting in the reception hall. She, hearing of the guest, thought it might be that Hart had come to take her. A gentleman with a mustache looked very dubious and asks her if she is Hanelope, because she looks very pretty and smart. He tells her that her pink eyes are especially rare. She looks scared at him and realizes that she is not Heart. That gentleman offers Hanelope's guardian a bag of money and tells him that there are those 10 departo promised as ransom for the child. The guardian looks at that money, and happy that the amount is good, he can take Hanelope with him now. She, hearing that, seems scared and thought about the ransom and even if he wants to sell her. She looks scared when that gentleman with the mustache reaches out to grab her, and she doesn't think much and hits him and runs away. And that gentleman was sitting down and hurting from her hit. While she was running, a woman catches her and asks her where she is running, so scared, and the gentleman wanted to tie her up with a rope before running away again. Hanelope was tied very tightly with rope by the two guys. She analyzed that it can't end like that. She had a very desperate face and started to cry and wondered why Heart's face came to her mind at that moment. She wished she could stay one step away from him, and she would look at him in silence. At one point, Heart appears, and these people look at him very frightened when they see him, and Hanelope is standing tied up with the rope, and they are around her. Heart decides to tell them that someone keeps shouting at him. Hanelope, hearing this, couldn't believe it and looks at Heart and analyzes that it can't be, and he really has come. His tutors and wife were kneeling before Emperor Heart and fearing how he would act. He used his sword to escape Hanelope and cut her rope. Heart gets down on his knees and reaches out his hand to Hanelope and asks her what kind of situation this is. She looks at him teary-eyed and starts crying louder, and he puts his hand on her shoulder and sadly asks her if she is hurt anywhere. She replies that she has no injuries. The guardians look very scared at Heart, and he asks them if they are really the guardians of that child. The man replies that they just picked up what the dead woman next door left them. Heart, hearing this, looks shocked and asks about the dead girl next door. The guardian seems very agitated along with his wife, and he tells Heart that one day a rootless woman suddenly appeared in the village. Plus, he was so crazy that he talked nonsense when she died. And his wife adds that he is right. It was an absurd request to take the child to the imperial family. Hanelope rolls her eyes when Heart stands in front of her and tells her that Laura tried to send Hanelope to the imperial family, at which point he turns his head to Maxime and commands him to arrest those people for slave trafficking and send them to the police office. The tutors and the gentleman with the mustache were very frightened hearing this decision of the emperor and begged him not to do it, but they were arrested anyway. Heart picks Hanelope up and asks her why she is so light, and if she has eaten anything. He looks the little girl in the eye and says he thinks he should go and feed her first. Hanelope had a sad and emotional face at that moment and didn't know what to say and analyzed that she still couldn't believe Heart had really come to her rescue and wondered if she hadn't chased him away because she was annoying. She holds Heart and thanks him very much for saving her, and in a moment she leans more against him and slowly falls asleep in his arms. Her father loved to serve alcohol. She was not a loving child in her previous life. In the days when she couldn't drink, her father became violent, and her mother and she became terrified. As time went on, her father's violence became more severe. Eventually, her mother took her out after the divorce, and after 5 years of divorce, her mother remarried. She was happy when she saw her mother's new husband and thought that this time everything will be fine. That gentleman smiles and asks her if she is Jiyu, because she looks just like her mother. From that moment, that person is called Seo Dajong and tells her to be friendly with his mother because they are the same age. The girl looks at her mother and analyzes how she can be so beautiful, and that gentleman extends his hand to her mother and tells her to take care of her. It was fun, the stepfather was good and Zhong was a smart kid. He thought they would become a real family, but contrary to expectations, the harmony didn't last long. Her stepfather was sitting on the couch with a test in his hand, and as Seo Da-jong came in, he calls her and asks her what those test results are, and Ji-yu is always on top, and asks her what's going on with her, and if she gets that bad grade now. She sits with her head down and decides to say that she also worked hard this time, and he tells her that he saw her every time she used her phone while studying. Her stepfather started comparing her to Da-jong. As he walks in the door, he tells Da-jong what time it is and asks her if she can't see Ji-yu coming home right after school and studying, and asks what is in her room and to clean like Ji-yu. She puts her hands on her head and fidgets and tells him to stop because she hears so much about Ji-yu and that Dad wasn't like that in the past and why everything has turned upside down since Kim Ji-yu came. And then Mom started noticing too. Mom tells Ji-yu that it seems like Dad and Da-jong's relationship has gotten worse these days because of her. Ji-yu thinks about being careful from now on, and Mom tells her that she thought they'd have a good time there. It was unfair. But she got it for her mom. Ji-yu is staring with a book in her hand and thinking that nothing has changed. In a moment, Da-jong bumps into her and laughs evilly and looks at how Ji-yu was sitting down and asks her if she is okay. She looks at Da-jong and analyzes that she tormented her away from her parents' eyes. Da-jong's clothes were destroyed. Lost items were found in her room. Ji-yu thought that everything happened because of her. Hanelope opens one eye and looks at Hart and doesn't understand if he is the prince. They are sitting on a couch and she asks where they are, and she thinks he is definitely at Uncle Sandy's house. Hart decides to tell her that she fell asleep right after seeing him, and now they're on their way to his mansion, at which point she wonders if she fell asleep because she was relaxed, but is surprised that Hart took care of her. Besides, it's Hart's mansion, and she was afraid he'd take her to the Imperial Orphanage. She gets down on her knees and bows her head to Hart, and thanks him for saving her. Then she'll do well at the orphanage. He looks at her and asks her what that means, and she looks at him with big eyes and asks him if he's not taking her to the orphanage now. He didn't understand why she thought so and asks her if she really wants to leave him like that. They arrived at Hart's mansion. He was very well dressed there and beautiful with a havuz in front of the mansion. He goes with Hanelope and shows her a room, telling her that this is the room she will stay in today and if she needs help to call the maid. Hanelope scratches at her eyes and wonders what's going on, and wonders if he isn't taking her to the orphanage. In a moment he turns and leaves and tells her then to sleep well. She starts crying and asks him to wait a minute. She analyzes that it would be nice for her to stay next to Hart, but wonders if he gave her such a fancy room and doesn't understand what the hell is going on with Hart. She puts her hand to her forehead and says that's enough for today, and analyzes that it's been 3 days since she came to Hart's mansion. Not only did he make a room for her, but he made a lab. She never thought she'd be there again. Plus, she even brought her mother's research from Uncle Sandy's house. She was worried she thought he left it behind, but she's glad he didn't. She lived a rich lifestyle, with new clothes and delicious food every day. But the problem for her was if he wasn't there again. A servant bends down in front of her and tells her that Hart has gone out. She thinks that afterwards she never met Hart. That day, after he rescued her, brought her to his mansion, she seemed to recognize her as his daughter. She looks at that potion on the plate and wonders if she wants to ignore it or not see it. She thinks about Hart leaving with Asta in the original. During this time, Asta's demands started to increase. She analyzes that if it is Hart, she could never refuse it. She shows that potion to the servant and asks him the last time he said his wrist hurt, and if it hurts now. Deacon takes that liquor in his hand and happily tells her he remembered that, and thanks her very much. He sits and thinks. It's a hot topic among other employees that Hanelope's medicine is good. Hanelope, hearing this, puts her hand behind her head and smiles and analyzes that she is glad she managed to get along with the employees during this period. But by the way, Hart will definitely not suffer anything. It will not work just in case. She should have prepared the medicine in advance. She was already in bed and put her hand to her mouth because she was yawning and tired. Before sleep, she wondered if Hart would be in his room at that moment. She crept down the hall and noticed that luckily he wasn't guarding Hart's room. She got to the door of his room and opened it and was amazed that Hart was right in bed and asleep. However, she noticed that he was in pain. Asta held Hart's hand and told him that the only person who could help her was His Majesty. It was always dangerous to be around Asta, but he couldn't refuse, even when Hart was abandoned by the woman he loved, even when his father ignored him. Asta was the only person who stood by him when everyone ignored him. He had no rational feelings while Asta held his arm. Now Hart was sick, and he was lying in bed, and he was very hot. He had a fever all over his body, and in a moment he opened his eyes a little, and he wondered who that little girl was. But it was really Hanelope. She put a bag of ice on his forehead, and he felt cold, and he didn't understand what it was. He was used to this touch. It was like he was sitting with Laura, and she was stroking his head. He wakes up very suddenly, and out of fright, he grabs Hanelope's hand very tightly. She tells him he is sick, and he asks her why she is in his room. She replies that she wanted to see the prince, so she waited during the day, but he didn't show up. She came at night, and thought he had a fever. Hanalope was a little shocked and sad, and tells Hart that she reminded him of her mother and couldn't leave him alone. Even when her mother was sick, she did. He looked at her and asked her when Laura was sick. He was sitting very seriously, and Hanalope was kneeling on his bed. He was thinking that he wanted to say that that child only took care of Laura when she died alone. After Hanalope left the mansion that day, it kept entering his mind. After Laura abandoned Hart, met someone and had a child, she's probably the one he didn't want to see the most, but for some reason he couldn't leave her alone. So he brought her to the manor and thought about what he was going to do with Hanalope. She rolls her eyes when he tells her why he suddenly tried to give her nutritional supplement only to him then. She, hearing that, she didn't understand what he was referring to, and she decides to reply that that's right. Her mother said the prince likes nutritional supplements. Hart is stunned and asks Hanalope if Laura told him about it. She analyzes and tells him that her mother told her not to tell anyone about it. Her father liked the medicine, no matter how bitter it was, as long as her mother gave it to him by mouth. He looks furious and slaps Hanalope's mouth shut and turns his head and asks her what the hell she told Laura, and not to go anywhere and say anything like that. Her mother and father don't want that. In a moment, he realizes that Hanalope told him, "Father," and he looks her in the eye very gladly and asks her that now she wants to say she is his daughter. She smiles at Hart and analyzes that the whole thing is very ridiculous, and she thought he brought her to the manor without knowing she was his daughter because he told her name was Hanalope. Hart looks very shocked at the little girl and decides to tell her that the birth record said she was 5 years old, and if she were his daughter, she would be 7. She, hearing this, gets nervous, and without thinking, tells Hart that this happened because the mother was busy working hard, so she reported her birthday later. But in fact, she is 7. He was left speechless and wondering if she really was his daughter. He didn't understand why he thought those pink eyes looked exactly like Laura's, but now he saw that blonde hair and considered that the girl looked just like him. Hanalope stared at him in amazement as he touched her hair. He analyzed that Laura had not forgotten the promise she had made to him, but he couldn't understand why, even though she had had a child, she had not returned. She is sitting on Hart's bed and decides to ask him if he is going to stop avoiding her now, and he asks her when he has been avoiding her. She takes a breath and replies that she has waited for the prince every day since he came to the mansion. But he wasn't there. But the cause was that he was very busy, and promises her that this will not happen anymore. Hanalope makes a big eye and asks Hart if she can sleep in a room with him today, and he sits and thinks about what to say to her, and in a moment, he takes her in his arms and tells her that he won't allow her to sleep in that room. She gets sad and considers that it's a pity. The atmosphere was good some time ago. He carries her in his arms and she fidgets and tells Hart that the prince still has a fever. She puts her hand on his forehead and he tells her that in any case he is fine now and doesn't feel sick. She notices that his forehead is not hot at all now. Hart puts Hanalope to bed and looks at her and tells her not to worry and to go to sleep. She smiles and tells him the same thing to do. As he walked down the hallway toward his room, he thought Hanalope called him Prince, and he didn't even call her Dad. Hanalope was in high spirits and thought Hart would be eating breakfast with her today, analyzing that he really wasn't avoiding her anymore. Now that she was closer to Hart, it would be much easier for her to protect him from Asta. Hart was enjoying his breakfast, and Hanalope was not too pleasantly surprised, and various thoughts came to her mind that they were not close at all. Initially, she knew her favorite person had a blunt personality, but after all, there is no such thing as a friendly table. Her eyes twinkled, and she realized that the food really was tasty, saying she had eaten a lot of delicious food since coming to the mansion, but today it was even better. The prince had no reaction and wondered why Hanalope was staring at him. She kept doing this, and at one point, after enjoying some more food, she told him the strawberries were delicious and to taste it with honey, dip it and eat it, and the meat was so soft. Hanalope was surprised because it was the first time she had eaten such soft meat, but he was so indifferent, as if he was reacting to a passing dog. Hart poured a glass of wine, and Hanalope ate some more and wondered if even now, how odd it would be if she called him Dad, but of course she had no intention of calling him that. He, while sitting with that glass in his hand, was struggling to ask Hanalope why so suddenly something happened that made her feel bad. She, while eating, analyzes that it's because of him. No matter how much he said, she didn't even listen. Hart seems very serious and asks Hanalope why she is upset. And after dinner, he promises to buy her a dress. She is surprised when she hears about the dress, and is already thinking about going clothes shopping with Hart, wondering if it will just be the two of them, and if this is really an opportunity to get closer. The lady at the clothing store was very happy to see Hanalope and Hart, and she starts to say it's an honor to meet her. Her name is Bichon, the designer of that clothing store, and she also points to her assistants. Hanalope was stunned at how she was received in that clothing store, and analyzes that what is the reason for approaching with Hart. It is too much that she called the designer to the mansion, and he didn't even show up. Bichon smiles at her and points to the dresses and tells her if she wants any of those dresses and asks her to tell him. He starts to show her a dress and says this dress is perfect for the lady, and asked her what she thinks about that dress. For her, that dress was pretty. One of Bichon's assistants was scared as to what she should do. The investment was interrupted, and Bichon smilingly approaches Hanalope and tells her there are a few at the manor, so she will take one, pleases her, then wants a few cups of tea. She drank all they gave her. While those three women were talking to each other, Hanalope was sitting and looking and analyzing that she felt strange with all the maids leaving. She smiled at Bichon, and Bichon asked her if she had any clothes she wanted, but Hanalope didn't. He shows her a pink dress and asks Hanalope what she thinks of that outfit. She wasn't too thrilled because there were so many decorations on this dress that it seems difficult to move. At one point, he shows her another blue dress, and she analyzes that it's not really beautiful, that it's the same as before. Bichon already seemed annoyed and tells her that she has many tastes, and asks her what kind of taste an unlegitimate child has, who doesn't even know where she came from. She, hearing this, gets saddened and wonders what this is. Those people's behavior is different from when the maids were there. The nurses were talking amongst themselves and smiling that they thought he had a taste for things, and wondered what the point of doing that was anyway. Hanalope looked terrified and analyzes that these people sent the maids out for this reason. At one point, Bichon grabs Hanalope's hand and takes her to the dress collection and pushes her forcefully down, and tells her that she should take a quick look at the clothes, and asks her if there is anything there that she likes. She puts her finger to her mouth and fake smiles and tells him she can make it up and buy it for all she's worth. Bichon gets excited, and the nurses sit on the couch and consult as to how they did it to Duke Aizen's illegitimate son, and thanks to one nurse, they sold it all then. Hanalope was thinking about that Duke Aizen's little boy, and wondering if those girls did that to Brantley too. Anyway, she tells him to keep looking at his clothes, and in her mind she analyzes that she doesn't want to be in a place like that anymore. She recoils from those girls sitting on the couch. She gets sad when she hears those girls talking about how she's lucky she managed to handle all the stockpiles with this, and when she comes back, she'll have to get ready to eat it next time. The three ladies wouldn't stop communicating as they sat on the couch, Bichon says. But His Highness's illegitimate daughter, he doesn't think he's alone. They say he might have another illegitimate child. The last time someone died in brothels, Prince Hart was there, and they wondered if Prince Hart didn't kill him. And they talked about how they heard he was always stealing sacred objects and going to other people's houses, but now they saw him committing crimes. Hanalope seems horrified by the words spoken by the ladies. They keep saying that someone said it wasn't like that before, but she thinks it was put there by an evil spirit. They once heard that she was under a curse, and that Prince Hart is just a monster born anyway. He is a disgrace to the Empire. She plugs Hart's ears and tells him that his father should not listen to what those evil ladies say. Hart von Reinenhaar was the ugliest man in the Empire. He was abandoned by his father, the Emperor. He was cruelly used by that who he thought was his savior, stealing sacred objects and killing people in Borladuri. That's not what Hart did, but the blame always fell on him. Hanalope cried and analyzed, pretending that nothing was wrong, but the truth was that it couldn't be. After being abandoned by someone she trusted, how painful it was for people she didn't even know to criticize. She knew that better than anyone else. Bichon looks shocked and asks that now that she thinks about it, Where has she gone again? And will the maids be back soon? They seem to have had a pleasant conversation. Hart walks up to Bishan with Hanalope in his arms, and earnestly and proudly says that his daughter is there. So don't worry, and carry on, and he will listen to her further. The illegitimate child, the nobles spent money in public on illegitimate children for the sake of respectability and reputation. But this is just material support. They didn't even care how the child was treated. The ladies were horrified when they found out that the prince is aware of all the gossip they talk about, and Bichon tells her that this is the first time he has ever done this, and he asks her again why she thinks he came there. She replies that, to match the lady's clothes. He holds Hanalope in his arms and looks seriously at the lady and says that while wearing this, he tells her that she can go to the imperial palace like this. Bichon looks nervous hearing that she is going to the imperial palace, and Hanalope looks surprised and thinks if Hart is going to introduce her to the emperor. Brantley once had an audience with the emperor and got down on his knees, and yet in this case the duke, who had no children, chose an illegitimate son as his successor. But Hart is not even married yet. There is no need to treat an illegitimate child in this way. The ladies were very desperate and were kneeling in front of Prince Hart saying they were wrong and begging him for mercy. Hart was thinking, why should they do this? While holding Hanalope in his arms, he asks the lady why she should have to have a monster born after all, and in a moment he orders the helpers to take those ladies. At the moment when they were being held by the helpers and slowly shouting out of the room to forgive them just once, he looks at Hanalope and analyzes that she seems to have been upset as expected. He is used to hearing that, but not that child. He remembers how she plugs his ears and tells him not to listen, and he takes a deep breath and realizes that he thinks he feels a little more comfortable now. She looks at Hart with saddened eyes and decides to ask him if it is really okay for Hanalope to greet the emperor's grandfather, and he replies that she can greet him because she is his daughter. She did not understand something. One of the sources of Hart's suffering was the emperor. Hart and the emperor only meet face to face during the necessary ceremonies. Hart hugs her, and she thinks that, however, if he introduces her as an illegitimate child, their relationship will get even worse. He decides to tell her that he has always despised the royal family and nobles for not taking responsibility for their blood. He stands with his hands crossed and his eyes closed, and tells Hanalope that he wants the child to take responsibility for the birth he has given birth to, so he will never do such a thing. He turns his head to her and tells her not to worry when she comes to see His Majesty. No one will be able to doubt her credentials. She sat smiling and thinking about responsibility. But she liked Hart because of that, of course. He is Hanalope's favorite character, and in this case, she will try her best. Hart was sitting on the couch, and Hanalope stands up a little because everything was already burning inside her, and tells the prince to let her study. He puts his hand to his chin as Hanalope tells him that if she wants to go to the imperial palace, she has to learn many things. He thinks that she would like to learn from the princess and plans anyway to offer Hanalope a tutor. So that's a good thing. She seems happy hearing that, and she would like to learn from a princess. She is the one and only princess in the empire. The only princess of the empire. Hanalope needed her to save Hart. He sits furiously on the couch and tells her that the princess of the empire is not the princess she imagines in a fairy tale. She is closer to the devil and asks her if she is okay with it. Hanalope replies that she wants to see the princess soon. He puts his finger to his eyebrow and analyzes the situation and decides to tell her that he understands, and not to seem strange to others. He asks her to call him Daddy, to be bolder and feel more comfortable than before. Hart remembers how Hanalope plugged his ears so he wouldn't listen to the bad criticism of him, and at that moment she wondered if he says before, "Talk about that moment." Hart decides to tell her to start practicing now. Hanalope looked at him with wide eyes and didn't understand what was going on, and analyzed how on earth she should call him bold and comfortable. Looking at him, she is ashamed and calls him Dad and asks him if it's okay to call her that, to which he replies that it's enough. Hart turns his back and wants to leave, and Hanalope doesn't understand what's going on and thinks she felt the corner of her mouth twitch, or thinks it's an illusion. Hanalope was in a very pretty dress, and a lady in the mansion smiles and tells her that she is much nicer dressed than the clothes from the shop last time, at which time she analyzes that it seems that what happened last time still bothers her. She closes her eyes and thinks that they came back late and had a hard time soothing them by crying, and tells the lady that she was wrong, and she shouldn't have left her alone. The day after the incident, Hart called a new designer and ordered clothes, but the problem was that she thought it was too much, while that designer showed her a dress and asked her if she would now try the next outfit. Hanelope was walking down the hall and analyzing that it was finally over, and she wanted to go to the lab and do some medicine. As she was walking down the hall, she heard a voice behind some doors and wondered if it was Hart's voice. She smiled and wondered why he was home today and what kind of room that was. Hart was sitting in a conference with several people around a wooden table. In the meantime, Hanelope bursts into the room and already understood that it is a conference room. She is a bit shocked and analyzes that she came at the wrong time. Hart notices her and calls her into the room. He stands with his hand to his chin and tells Hanelope to sit on a chair. She doesn't understand what to do and thinks in a sad way if she can really get in and where she should sit. He asks her why she hesitates so much. Hart was holding her in his arms, being very serious, and she seemed a little upset. Meanwhile, he says now to move on to the next item. A gray-haired gentleman looks at Hart and asks him who that girl is because he's curious. And next to him stands another gentleman with his hand on his chin and says that if he's thinking, he heard that His Royal Highness brought a child, and you ask the gray-haired gentleman if he doesn't want to ask the prince if that child is his daughter. Hart had his hand on Hanelope's forehead, and after a few moments, he decides to say that the child is his daughter, and her name is Hanelope von Reinhardt. She had begun to think that Hart had announced her to his vassals, and really has no intention of hiding her. The vassals were talking amongst themselves, and saying that this was the reason he had gently called a meeting. One of them was grooming his mustache and wanted to say he was curious, because he was trying to understand the credible Ghostgate issue, which he usually ignored. Red Ghostgate, in the original story, was a newspaper that published malicious articles about Hart. However, because the editor was kept secret, they had no idea who wrote that article. However, in the original novel, Hart did not follow the editors to the end. He thought about how he held Asta by the shoulders and told her he didn't care what others thought of him, as long as it was for him. However, Red Ghost newspaper, they wanted to finish it. Meanwhile, Hanelope analyzes that now, this newspaper she was looking at on the table was Red Ghost newspaper. There were only provocative articles. Hart puts his hand on the table and very seriously tells Baron Maytu that talk about it later. The Baron puts his hand to his heart and apologizes, then says he completely understands. His Royal Highness, even if it was him, would not want to show such a pretty daughter to such a newspaper. Hanelope's jaw dropped and her eyes were targeted. She wondered in her mind, what was the reason she wanted to finish Red Ghost Gate? Because of her. Then analyzed that there was no way the last time the designer cursed Hart. She had been paying attention to how anxious she was. She raises her head to Hart as he holds her, and he tells her that because he'll make sure there won't be things she won't like more, then she receives that Hart, who doesn't care about anyone but Asta, would do this for her. There have already been people who had doubts when they read the novel. Most of the content of the Red Ghost newspaper is about Hart's secret outings. In that sequence, he was dressed in a black robe. Hanelope did not know the inner conditions of the mansion, but she knew details about Hart's external activities. The vassals were looking very serious, and she analyzes that she thought it might be one of Hart's vassals. One of the people there might be the editor of Red Ghost magazine. One of the vassals gets up from his chair and says to end today's discussion there. As he leaves, Hanelope calls out to him from behind, and he turns his head to her and asks if she has anything to say. Hanelope was happy in her pink dress being new and asks that vassal if she looks pretty, telling him that the first designer who came in was bad, but the new good designer made those clothes. He grooms his mustache and asks Hanelope what was up with the designer who came first. After a successful clothing store visited Prince Hart's mansion, it was well known that it went bankrupt overnight. This was because the designer and his assistants had committed the crime of insulting the royal family. However, no one knew what kind of insult Hart had suffered. The gentleman gets down on his knees in front of the little girl and asks her what happened then, and if she was there. She reluctantly replies that this is a secret. Hanelope starts to get nervous and doesn't hold back saying it's a secret and not to tell anyone. But the gentleman in the whisper tells her it's okay, and not to worry because she won't tell anyone about it. The Lord wants to leave and waves to Hanelope, telling her that, well, he has urgent business to attend to, and she tells him that he must keep his promise. She watches sadly as he leaves and analyzes that she is a girl he doesn't trust at all. But it doesn't matter because she wanted to pass it on to someone. She had to be smart and know the bait first. While her uncle is sitting around the room, Hanelope approaches him and greets him and tells him he has something to brag about. She will make sure he catches the person spreading bad rumors about Hart. One day, an oracle of the god Prache descended to Berg's main temple. She will send a saint to take care of the people, and the one who reinvents dead springs and revives dead life is her representative. They were supposed to find the fountain of life in Parasan Mountain. The saint closes his eyes, and at that time they were in the place where he was visited by the Pope who received the oracle. There was a girl with black hair who traveled through dimensions. People who saw her called her Miracle Saint Yenna. The mustachioed gentleman points and says that as of today, their family has decided to adopt Yenna. So from now on, Yenna will use his daughter's room and tells her to try using a room on the 3rd floor. A kid was sitting around saying he was sorry for Miss Asta, but he begged to break their bond. He fell in love with Miss Yenna, then her life changed completely. Miss was walking hand in hand with that kid and his father, and then it was analyzed that Gina, who was loved by everyone, took everything away from him. This one was sitting with a fan in his mouth after pushing Yenna down and malevolently apologizing to her. He couldn't contain his anger, so he persistently bullied Yenna. But Yenna wasn't as innocent a child as he thought. This one was tied up and brought out in front of all the people by 2 knights, and one of them tells her that she is condemned to death for trying to kill the saint. She believes she was wrongly accused of trying to murder her. While they were tying the rope around her neck, she was crying, and she didn't understand why it had come to this. And she wondered if everyone only listened to Yenna, and she prayed to whoever would let her have her revenge and give her whatever she wanted. She was sitting on the couch, and she already understood that this was a dream, and she wondered why she was dreaming about what happened before she came back. She felt very bad. It's okay that nothing will ever be the same as it is now, because now the holy that has appeared. The people around were happy and shouted that she is the holy miracle worker who purified the cursed river, and some prayed to her to help their children get well, because she is a holy miracle, and after that, she died. She was sitting somewhere in the universe talking to Prache if she could give her something, even if it's her life, telling her that her name is Prach, and it will bring her back in time, and to give her her soul in return. The lady with her happy child both looked at Asta, because she cleansed the river. All she had to do is cast a decolonizing spell on the river water and pretend to purify it. When she heals a child, she applies paralyzing drugs to make it look like it's dying. All she had to do is pretend to secretly give her the antidote. This one stood in front of all the people and wondered what would happen if she is a fake saint. Before Yenna came, she had to anticipate everything. In this case, even if she appears later and causes a miracle, she will just be a copycat of her. She joins hands and was very happy analyzing that everyone not to worry because she will pray for everyone. So she asks them to wait. She did not want to lose her place to Yenna and others. This one gets behind a gentleman and asks him if he has descended the new oracle. He replies that again he is a secret oracle. The talents she acquired after the regression was the ability to interpret Sen's language. She was reading that oracle there. It talked about Tarov's illegal auction house, Red Pandative. In fact, it was the same ability Prache gave her to use as a hired boy. She makes a very dubious look while reading and says that even if she gave her soul, what else is she asking her to do? That gentleman was holding the oracle in his hand, and she was waving it at him as she thought that Prache was the one who called Yenna into this world, was the one who brought Asta back, intending to get revenge on Yenna. She didn't know what was going on, and she thought she would have to do something annoying again, and maybe ask Hart to do it. She had a prickly look and analysis that Hart's attitude isn't what it used to be, and she's sure it was all due to that baby. They also said Hat said the baby was his baby, to prepare for Gina coming soon. He needs a hunting dog like Hart, and can't let that baby take him. Hanelope was tired from sleep, because she had not been able to fall asleep, and wondered if she should go on with what she had read earlier. She went out into the hall and looked around and reached the window and looked closely, and noticed Hart. She had even prepared a cloak and a regular carriage so that he would not be noticed, and wondered where he was going at this hour. She seems very shocked and agitated and analyzes that it seems today is already the day. Hart has faced another crisis because of this, the sweet potato episode. Hart gets out of the carriage and his helper tells him they have arrived. There was Asta in the carriage. Hart tells Maxim they are going in first and asks them to follow him after cleaning. Maxim puts his hand to his chest and accepts Prince Hart's obligation, and after Hart and Asta go inside, there are sounds in the carriage that startle Maxim, and in a moment, Hanalope comes out. Hanalope was sitting in a carriage crate, and Maxim was shocked and asked her why she was there, and if she had followed him from the mansion. She happily replied that she had. Maxim takes a deep breath and puts his hand to his forehead and says, "He can't do that, miss. If she is caught by His Majesty the Prince, she will be scolded, because she knew where Asta was and followed him." Hanalope looks dubious and understands how she did it. This is an illegal auction house. Although it looks like a shabby building from the outside, there is a hidden auction house in the basement. In the original novel, this follows Praeche's oracle, the demon god, and she came there to retrieve the sealed stone of the seal. However, dangerous things have always happened where the seal stone is. Hart walks with a sword and Asta behind him. That's why Asta took Hart as a shield. Hanalope analyzes that's why she can't leave Hart alone. She has to get him away from Asta as soon as possible. Maxim gets down on his knees and asks Hanalope if she loves Hart so much. She happily replies that she loves him because her father is the best in the world. As she sat in that crate, she listened to Maxim tell her that His Majesty finally has someone like this. Someone who not only gives but also receives. Hanalope's eyes watered and she analyzes that Maxim was originally on Hart's side, but he simply followed in silence. And finally, only after Hart died, regretted doing nothing. Maxim looks at Hanalope, who was still sitting in that crate, and tells her to go back quickly, and he will take her there. But she replies that his father told him to come for him earlier, asking him if it's okay if he doesn't go. He, hearing this, tells him that he has to promise to keep quiet. Hart and Asta were masked as they stood in that auction house. Two men in the front talked about what they were up to this time. They came because they heard some good magic tools had been released, and the gentleman also says he came to save the slave.